Before we get into today's interview, I want to tell you about another podcast that I think you're really going to love. It's called the Marketing Book Podcast, and it was named by LinkedIn as one of 10 podcasts that will make you a better marketer. It's hosted by my friend Douglas Burdett, who we've had on the podcast in the past. And Douglas does weekly interviews with authors of best-selling marketing and sales books. According to an Adobe survey of marketers, 76% of them said that marketing has changed more in the last 2 years than in the previous 50. So when you subscribe to this podcast, the Marketing Book Podcast, you're going to be able to keep up with the quickly changing landscape of modern marketing and sales. One thing that is unique about this that I think is really interesting is that Douglas reads every single book before every interview. And you can tell that in the engagement that he is able to have with each of the authors that he interviews. You can just tell he knows this content because he's read the entire book. He hasn't just read the cliff notes. And so he has done over 100 interviews. I think they're at episode 134 right now. By the time you're hearing this, they might be at 135. But I want you to head over. You're already in the podcast app. Head over and search for the Marketing Book Podcast. Get subscribed. Download a few episodes. You can check out their website at marketingbookpodcast.com. You can follow them on Twitter at Marketing Book, but I really, really, really want you to subscribe to this podcast. This is one that I get a ton of value from, and I think you will as well. You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with David Rodnitzky. He is the founder and CEO at 3Q Digital. David, how are you doing today?
Good, James. Thanks for having me.
I am really excited to chat with you today, David. We're going to be talking about targeting enterprise buyers with Facebook ads. And this is something that I'm really interested in learning more about. I know our listeners are going to get a lot of value out of this as well. You're going to be covering 3 strategies that we can use to do this. But before we do that, I want our listeners to understand just a little bit of context around you and what you and your team are up to at 3Q Digital.
Yeah, sure. So 3Q Digital, we are one of the largest digital growth agencies out there. We primarily help companies market online through Facebook, LinkedIn, and Google. And then we have a lot of other services that support those media channels like strategy, analytics, and conversion rate optimization.
Got it. All right. So David, you're clearly, this is something that you're living in every day. As it relates to targeting enterprise buyers on Facebook, why is this a topic? Obviously, you could speak to a lot of different topics. Why is this particular one the thing that you wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, I think there are 2 reasons. Number one is that oftentimes clients will initially go to LinkedIn as an advertising campaign source, and they may have a lot of success, but they find that it's very expensive. So they're always looking for alternatives. And the second is, even if you're an enterprise CEO, the odds are that at some point in your day, you're probably going onto Facebook and checking an update or something. So It's an untapped opportunity to reach those folks.
Yep. I completely agree. So we're gonna dive into 3.5 strategies, as you explained it offline, for how we can target these enterprise buyers on Facebook. The first one is leveraging your existing LinkedIn campaigns. Can you talk us through this first strategy?
Yeah. So whenever you're doing any LinkedIn campaign, you're capturing data about users. And so in one case, you may have a white paper that you ask someone to download, and you ask them for their email address. In another case, you may just send someone to a custom landing page, and you're able to cookie that person. In both cases, you can use that data and port it over to Facebook. So in the case of the landing page, you might have unique cookie information about that person. You can share that information with Facebook through a custom audience, and now you're able to market to those people on Facebook. And the same thing would be true with the email leads you capture. You can use those email addresses and try to match them against people on Facebook, and then have an additional marketing channel to reach those people. The other thing that I'll say, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon on LinkedIn, is that oftentimes when someone signs up for LinkedIn, they will use their personal email address as their contact rather than their corporate email address. And I think a lot of people do this because they're moving jobs and they want to have a permanent place where people can reach them. So if you actually have contacts or can get contacts on LinkedIn, you can easily aggregate those and then use Facebook's custom audience system to reach out to people on their personal email addresses on Facebook.
Got it. So would that look like exporting email addresses from, say, your sales team's first degree networks and kind of working that angle, or are there other ways to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Any way you can get email addresses that it's in a way that is compliant with whatever rules and regulations that your industry follows. But essentially, when it comes to Facebook, the number one way that people have success with Facebook is through this concept of custom audiences and lookalike audiences. And a custom audience is almost always an upload of email addresses that Facebook is going to match against their users' email addresses and allows you to market to those people directly, or they can do a lookalike audience, which enables you to take email addresses that you've uploaded, and Facebook's algorithm will go out and find people similar to those uploads based on data they've collected. And so you can actually potentially target new people that you don't even have contact information on through that method.
Got it. And how many emails do you typically need to upload to be able to build a custom audience or a lookalike audience?
I think in a best case scenario, it's something like 10,000, which is pretty high for enterprise, obviously. But I believe, and I'll have to go double check on this later, I think you can do as little as 1,000.
Okay.
Keep in mind that even if you're targeting the C level of an enterprise company, if you can go a little broader than that and find the mid-level people, even if those aren't your ultimate audience, there's lots of ways to influence those people, and you can reach that sort of 10,000 person list in creative ways.
Got it.
So I guess maybe one way to say it is if you're doing account-based marketing and you're literally looking for the CIOs at the top 500 enterprise companies, then Facebook's going to be really challenging for you. But when you're looking at trying to reach people at multiple functions and at Hewlett-Packard or IBM or something, then there's lots of ways to reach that number and target.
Got it. Okay. So do you have any advice, David, around the creative that tends to perform better on Facebook? You with this particular strategy, you're taking existing LinkedIn campaigns. Should your campaign on Facebook kind of match stylistically what your LinkedIn campaign looked like? What have you seen there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that on Facebook, the things that almost always work are some sort of catchy image or a video.
Okay.
And people are on Facebook because they're looking to take a break from whatever they're doing on a daily basis. And so having a very complex white paper as your offer is probably not going to sort of pique their interest. But a intro video about the interesting functionality and benefits of your product, or something that is going to be somewhere between the hard sell technical information and branding, is what's going to get people's attention on Facebook.
Got it. All right. So that's the first strategy we're going to talk about. These next two are a little bit different. It's more around extracting information from Facebook to get the corporate information. Can you walk us through this second strategy?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, on Facebook, people are typically using their personal email address as opposed to their corporate email address. Now, there are some who will use their corporate email address, but more likely than not, someone's using their personal email address. A lot of companies have fan pages on Facebook, and even enterprise companies, and they find that people follow them as their fans on Facebook. And so if you can extract the email addresses of your fans on Facebook, if people have identified themselves as being interested in your business, you can start to take those personal emails and turn them into corporate emails. And the way that you do that is through some tools that essentially are connecting the dots in terms of missing data. So there's a company, I have no personal connection or business interest in this company, but there's a company called Full Contact. That's one example of this, where if you have a list of 10,000 personal email addresses that maybe you've gotten from your fan page or from people registering for something on Facebook, they'll take that information and they will do some reverse engineering and figure out the corporate email addresses of those people. So now you've got corporate email addresses that you can start mailing out to, and you know that they're somewhat interested in your business because they're a member of your fan page.
Got it.
But now you've got the corporate information.
So I didn't realize that you could extract email addresses from people that like your fan page on Facebook. So that's super interesting.
I think there are different settings that determine the degree to which the information you can ask from someone. So, the individual has the right to sort of limit information. And then when someone likes your page, you can ask for different things.
Got it. All right. So that's the second strategy. Walk us through the third one.
So the third strategy, which one of my team members calls the Waterfall Strategy, is sort of doing your own reverse engineering. So what you do is if you have a bunch of information about your target audience, let's say you know their name, maybe you know the address of their office, maybe you know their phone number, but you don't have their email address, you can essentially upload all of that personally identifiable information that you have access to into Facebook and basically tell Facebook, try to find these people. And you're not going to have a 100% match rate, but Facebook can actually do a pretty good job of creating a pool of people based on the identifiable information that you provided to them.
Okay. And what was the half strategy that you mentioned earlier?
The half strategy I actually kind of already mentioned. It was the idea of if you have someone who you're connected to or your salespeople are connected to on LinkedIn that you didn't get through a marketing campaign, but that you got through connections, you could use that to create audiences on Facebook. I already gave it up.
I love it. Okay. So David, you and your team have a lot of experience with Facebook ads. We've talked in depth and covered these 3.5 strategies for targeting enterprise buyers. But is there anything maybe at a higher level with Facebook ads that someone listening to this, maybe they haven't done a lot of experimenting with Facebook ads yet? Any piece of advice that you would give them, even if it's not specific to targeting enterprise buyers?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing you can do in Facebook is actually to test creative. So a lot of people in marketing are used to thinking about if I can just reach the right audience, then I win.
Yeah.
In Facebook's case, because of the custom audiences and lookalike audiences, they do a really good job of putting you in front of the right people. So then it's up to the marketer to actually do lots and lots of testing of messages, of creative, of assets that you're providing to the end user to try to increase the conversion funnel. So it's a little bit different than what you typically see for a lot of our campaigns when we're talking about ABM and really deep targeting. It's actually the opposite. You really want to just trust Facebook to get you in front of the right people and then create really good creative.
Got it. And do you have any recommendations around kind of how many variations of the copy, how many variations of the graphic or the video should you be aiming for when you're, about to launch a Facebook ad campaign?
It's hard to pick an exact number, but I would say that, a good maybe rule of thumb is to have 3 or 4 creative that you start with, and then sort of do a king of the mountain test where you're running them against each other. And after a couple of weeks, you get statistical significance that one is clearly better than the other. Then create another 2 or 3 to challenge that leading creative to see if you can beat it, and just keep going until it gets to the point where, you've got a creative that really just can't be beat. And, you need to maybe refresh some colors or do some tweaks here and there to make sure it doesn't get stale, but that you've basically found your winner.
Got it. And then as far as ad exhaustion goes, David, is that something people should be thinking about, that they can, they do all this testing to land on the kind of the perfect combination of creative? How long does that typically last before you exhaust the audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for every network. I mean, I usually think that for something like Google, you can have an ad that runs for literally months or years. And because it's a new group of people coming in every day, you don't really have exhaustion. For something like Twitter on the other end of the spectrum, your half-life is like 3 to 5 days. Something like Facebook or LinkedIn, because you are going to reach the same people over and over again, but they're maybe not using it as intensely as Twitter. You probably have anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks before you really start to see the exhaustion take place.
Got it. And Facebook will notify you and
because
kind of
Facebook,
throttle your ads accordingly.
The calculation that they make is a combination of click-through rate times how much you're willing to bid per click, which effectively turns into a cost per 1,000 impressions for them, or CPM. So if your click-through rate starts to decline, your CPM will decline.
Okay.
If your CPM declines, you're just going to show up less. So you'll sort of see it in the numbers that suddenly you'll stop seeing your ads rotate as much, and that's when you know it's time to refresh.
Got it. I love it. David, I want to close with this question. I love asking this question. I hope our listeners get to know our guests on another level. What would you say, David, is the legacy that you want to leave?
I think from a business perspective, I've worked really hard to build a culture that not only is high performing, but is one that people really enjoy working at. And I think that, I've had several people on my team who have left and started their own agencies, their own companies. And I look at people like Bill Walsh, the former 49er coach, who has a whole lineage of coaches beneath him.
Head coaches that were once beneath him, yep.
Exactly. Sort of the cradle of coaches analogy. So I think if I can have some of my leaders go off and start their own companies and end up borrowing some of my techniques and hopefully improving some of my techniques and creating great cultures themselves, that would be a great legacy.
I love it. I love it. David, if there's somebody that wants to stay connected with you, they want to learn more about 3Q Digital, what's the best way for them to go about doing both of those things?
Sure. So the URL is 3Q, the number 3, the letter Q, digital.com. And I'm on Twitter at Rodnitzky, which is RODNITZKY.
I love it. Awesome, David. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been fantastic, and I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, James.
If you're a B2B marketer, we want to feature you on sites like Huffington Post, Social Media Examiner, and Chief Marketer. Every week, we send out a question related to B2B marketing. We use the responses to those questions to fuel the content we write for really popular websites. So head over to sweetfishmedia.com/questions and sign up today.
Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.